Eretz Yisrael a little bit? Or does anybody else have something else, another agenda? Okay, I'll talk about how I came into this. I come from a non-religious background originally, and I started. We were tourists. I came with my family on a few tours. I had a memorable hike up Masada by night, by moonlight. In one of I think the last year you could do that legally. They closed down the place and turned it into a national park that charges way too much money for what they have to offer. But we went up when it was still free, and you could hike up by moonlight. We saw the moon rise over the Dead Sea, and we slept on top. It was really quite fun. I went with my sister, who was learning at the Hebrew University, and a couple of her friends. And the next year, evidently, somebody else who slept up there went to the side of the mountain to relieve himself and walked a little too far. And he died tragically. And from that time, they prohibited people sleeping up there. They didn't want the responsibility. In any case, I did do some of the tours when I was a kid, but I was really not into them. My mother, some years ago, found a diary I kept of one of our trips when I was 14, 13 years old. In my diary, it's quite funny now if you know me, especially. In the diary, I wrote, we went on a lot of tours today. They were really boring. We saw a pile of rocks. The tour guide kept speaking. And then in my diary, I described the next paragraph, and then we went out to lunch. And in Israel, they take a pita and they put the French fries in the pita. I went to great lengths describing the delicacies in Eretz Yisrael. And then the next entry and the next day, and today we woke up and we saw another pile of rocks. Yeah, so I wasn't so into the tour guiding back in the day. Then I came to Eretz Yisrael. I came in my junior year abroad. I started learning. My curiosity was piqued about this Judaism thing. I have a longer story about how I became religious. One day I hope I actually become religious. And we're all works in progress. And eventually I actually got really into things. And it's quite ironic because I'm that guy now who's boring everybody on these tours, talking incessantly about these piles of rocks. The thing that happened is that these piles of rocks, if they could talk, they'd have wonderful stories to tell. I wound up learning a lot of those stories, and they're sublime. They're wonderful. My becoming religious is a complicated story. I can't say I became religious because of traveling around Eretz Yisrael, but it had a major impact. As I went, I essentially reconnected with Jewish history, our really glorious heritage, in a literal kind of a way, because it's one thing if you read about it in a book, which is great. Another one if you study it in classrooms, also very fine. But when you go out into the field and you reimagine many of the great stories from the Tanakh, from the Bible, from the Talmud, from later history of great Jews who traveled in these parts, it becomes real, it becomes tangible, and you feel yourself connected in a visceral, exciting kind of a way. And I started guiding Reform summer trips through NIFTY, which is the Reform Youth Group. Then I got a kind of an unofficial badge, but not the official tour guide badge. Eventually I got the tour guide badge. Eventually I became an instructor, and I ran a course training tour guides through the tourism ministry. And I have a whole curriculum. One day I'd love to implement it. I have an idea that one day I'll run a religious, Torah-oriented tour guide class. Today what exists in the ministry is a very secular, very, in my view, very dry and depleted kind of an approach to guiding Eretz Yisrael. And I have a different vision of how that could happen. So that's a little bit my getting into guiding Eretz Yisrael. Today I've been, I can't say all over, but I'm working on it, close. And there's certain sites. Does anybody have favorite sites you've been in Eretz Yisrael? Any place you'd like to go that you'd like to hear about? Hi, Levi Wolf. And I don't think I greeted you, Ezra Brooker. Welcome, Ezra. Okay.
All right, bye.
I'll just keep talking then. You all just be passive out
I'm
there. That's
having
fine. Don't
paying
worry about me.
attention. I'm writing something. Sorry.
No
I'll be
problem.
paying
No
attention.
problem. By the way, tomorrow night in this time slot, finally I have it ready. I've been working hard on it today. You got your trolley question, Eitan. I have a new file. I was going to say, a new file has been born and it's a boy. Yeah.
So do you make a Hatov Meitiv on it? Or
I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But Shlomi and Samuel, how do you like to be called? I'm just calling you by what it's written there. Are you Shmuel or Samuel or Fivey?
Yeah, 5E.
Five is good? Okay. I got used to that with your brothers, with Yaakov and Cheskel.
Yeah.
Fine. Great. So I just got myself totally sidetracked. Yeah. If anybody has, anyway, I have files that I have several hundred of them that I work on all these different topics. And I certainly have files on. I mean, I keep them right here actually. These are some of the tours that I do. The major tours that I do around Eretz Yisrael I kept in a pile that I have easy access to. So 2 weeks ago, Ezra was there, and just Ezra who's out there. Ezra and I and a group from my shir went to ancient Yafo, where Yonah, the great prophet Yonah, went out to the coast, and the whole swath of history was told. We went to Yafo. We were in, also last week, we went to Tzfas and Tiberia, two of the four holy cities, as the Kabbalists like to refer to them. And I like going to the off the beaten path type places as well. Some of the more exciting tours that I've guided in Eretz Yisrael are in places that are harder to reach. They call them the West Bank or Gaza Strip, frankly, for that matter. Places where there tend to be a lot of Arabs, so it's not so hospitable. But unfortunately, those Arabs are sitting on some really holy territory. In fact, that's very relevant in the news right now because the state of Israel is discussing the annexation of the West Bank, and how that's going to actually unfold is anybody's guess. There are a lot of talking heads and a lot of commentary on this. What will actually happen remains to be seen. But there's a lot of concern about, will Jews have access to some of these thrilling archaeological sites, these tells? There's Tel Balata. Anybody ever been there before? Tel Balata? It's what they call it. Balata is an Arabic name. If it's unfamiliar, that's why. But it's what the Arabs call the archaeological tell, which is the mound representing an ancient city, in this case, the ancient city of Shechem. Shechem, which is the first place that Avram Avinu is brought into in Eretz Yisrael, at the very beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. He says, go to the land, and he shows him Shechem. Shechem, which the Gemara says is Mezuman or Mezuman of Furanus. It's designated for bad stuff to happen. And there have been a lot of tragedies there. Dinah was raped there. The Levi and Shimon destroyed Shechem. Yosef was sold when his brothers were in Shechem, and the nation split apart forever in Shechem. But Yosef is buried in Shechem, and it doesn't have to be so. And there's some indication that in the future, perhaps Shechem will actually fulfill a much brighter destiny and not just be designated for bad things. And it's right in the heartland in Eretz Yisrael. And today, the way you'd get to Shechem is by there are different levels of armored bus. These are modern realities that we, especially in Eretz Yisrael, have to deal with hostility of the local populations. So they have a kind of armory of the buses, which is called Memugan Yeri, Memugan Avanim, which means it's stone-proof. They throw stones at the bus and the windows won't shatter. And then they have something called Memugan Yeri, which is bulletproof, which is a higher grade and usually not as pleasant a bus. Ari, which bus do you take to get to and from your home?
I'm just in Yerushalayim, so it's neither.
Aren't you in Tel Zion?
No, I'm in Yerushalayim.
Oh, so I was confused. Well, when you go to your wife's family, they live in Tel. Who lives in Psagot or Tel Zion?
My wife's family lives in Tel Zion. Well,
When you
in
travel there, what is the
in
mode?
Kiryat Yaakov,
Which kind of bus
technically.
do you use?
Um, I don't think they're using the bulletproof or the. Are they using stone-proof buses?
Buses on it? Mostly not anymore. I think.
I know they're not using bulletproofs. I don't know about stones.
I mean,
Okay.
most buses.
Usually
will-
in the area north and south of Yerushalayim, they have some kind of protection. When you go into Shrem, you get the heavy duty version, and you can only go in the middle of the night under full army surveillance. But going was quite thrilling. And Kever Yosef, if it's the right Kever, the Kever means grave, the gravesite of Yosef Hatzadik, Yosef the son of Yaakov Avinu. If that's the grave, which there is some question about. The tradition as we have it today is mostly from a group of people who live in that area called the Shomronim or the Kutim or the Samaritans. It's not an inherently Jewish tradition, but it's a logical one, and so it could be. That's the place. Jews seem to accept that that's the place, but there are a lot of things that people accept that may or may not be true. On top of Shem are two great mountains, Har Grizim, Har Eval. Two of my other favorite places to guide on Har Grizim. You'll meet the Shomronim. There's a remnant of them today who are. Oh, thank you. There's a remnant of them today who are alive and doing their thing. They are not Jewish, but they consider themselves such, and they are a kick. And we went to visit them. On Har Eval, you know, I am in my office. I have visual aids. I can take you on a simulated tour. Some of you may recall these pictures. This, by the way, is about a 140-year-old picture of Yosef's tomb in Shechem. Can you see? Okay. Since only Eitan and Ari have the video, I can't really tell and nobody else is responding. I can't really tell. This is what you'd see if you're standing on the mountains south of Shechem, Har Grizim, and this is what you'd see looking down into what's today Kever Yosef. For me to describe which one of these buildings is Kever Yosef will take us the better part of the rest of this year. So I'm going to skip that. This is what Shechem looked like also about 140 years ago, between the mountains. You can picture, this is an important city in the Torah. It's the place, for example, that all of the Jewish people come to en masse the day after they enter Eretz Yisrael under the leadership of Yehoshua, right after the Torah ends in the beginning of the book of Yehoshua, of Joshua. And this is what you'd see. Hi, Simon. Simon, it's nice to see at least your name.
Hi, Rabbi. I'm at work. I wanted to say hi.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. Really, really good to hear your voice.
I'm at work.
Yeah, no problem. Understood. Very good. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll do.
Nice to see you, Rabbi.
We'll do. Excited he's coming. Okay. Let me show you really why I took this thing out, because it's, I think, of great interest. There is... Oh, these are some interesting pictures, frankly. This is what I described before, Tel Balata. That's what you would see today. It's relatively underdeveloped, not that elaborately excavated, because it's in kind of a no man's land. So archaeologists tend not to go as much as they would some of the other sites. These are a couple of the coins, ancient coins that were discovered there. What they call coins with steps from that lead up to the Mount Gerizim. This is a picture also from that same period, maybe 140 years ago, of these Shomronim, Samaritans or Kutim, who I could describe if anybody's interested in greater detail. And what I'm really wanting to show you is on Har Eval. Har Eval is the mountain on the other side. You got Har Grizim in the south, Har Eval in the north, and Shechem lodged like a dog bone in between the two mountains. And the Jewish people on the second day they're in Eretz Israel is arrayed for a great ceremony in which all ordained in the Torah. We're going to be reading about this soon enough. In a few weeks, when we get to Parshas Re'eh, it'll describe it in detail, which tribes stand where, and Moshe and the Kohanim and Yoshua are standing down in the middle, the Levim, and everybody has a very designated place. There's a recital of certain blessings and certain curses. They're told if they keep the mitzvahs, it'll go really well for them, and if they don't, they'll be in big trouble. And there's a certain ominous feeling that day. And Har Eval is considered the mountain where they faced when they were giving the klala, which is the curse. So it's a heavy-duty mountain. Interestingly, since that time in history, at least what we can ascertain archaeologically, nobody's really lived there. It's just a big old open mountain. And even till today, it's not really, it's not widely developed. And what there is, however, is quite thrilling and something that was discovered in relative terms really recently, in the early 1980s. That was in my lifetime, not yours, but still, that's not so long ago. A secular archaeologist from Tel Aviv University went up there and found, he found this. Take a look. Structure that looks like this. What do you make it out to be?
That's a mizbeach.
I think so. You think so. The archaeologists have their doubts, but this archaeologist, Adam Zartal, I think was his name. He also said, like you, Ari, he also felt this was a mizbeach. Take a look one more time, and I'll show you a picture that's drawn of an altar, a mizbeach, where we brought sacrifices. This is in Rav Kahati's version of the Mishnayos. This is how he has the mizbeach with the ramp. It's called the kevesh, that leads up to the altar with four corners, and the point where you bring the actual sacrifice at the very top. And so there is a mizbeach up on top of this mountain that they call Har Eval. And what do you know? Here's a picture of what it looks like today from a bit of a distance. You can make it out, right? You can see the altar and the ramp going up to it. And then here's a guy guiding that same place. That would be me. Right. So it's pretty striking because Adam Zartal comes with a whole bunch of really persuasive data. He said he found, first of all, no structure in antiquities looked that way, other than an altar. You have to realize archaeology is, for the secular Jews in Israel, it's almost like their own form of religion, and they get very fussy over it. And if somebody tries to prove the Bible through archaeology, they don't go easy in the night. And so the naysayers, the people who have to disprove the Bible, people who are anti-Torah, they'll say, no, that's not a mizbeach, it's a guard tower. No, it's not a guard tower. It's an ancient Roman back scratcher. No, it's not a back scratch. You hear where I'm going. Meaning you can come up with any theory. That's how archaeology works. And whoever speaks loudest wins. In any case, Adam Zartal found so much compelling indication that this was an actual mizbeach, including the existence of many. First of all, he carbon 14 dated it, and came up with indications that this dates back to, what do you know, just about the exact same time that Yoshua ben Nun conquered Eretz Israel and built a, mizbeach, an altar on top of, Har Eval. They found animal bones, only kosher animal bones. And that's remarkable because there were altars and other kinds of religious sites, cultic sites, not Jewish, that had non-kosher animal bones. Meaning lots of people offered sacrifices back in the day, but only Jews would offer only kosher animals. And in this event, many of the animals were male, a year old. Anybody know which korban that fits? Which one?
Is that Korban Ola?
You got it. The burnt offerings, Korban Ola. Meaning they fit the actual specifications, the ones that the Torah give of Korbanos. And like that. A lot of very compelling indication that this actually maybe in all days of Yoshua ben Nun when they came into Eretz Israel, and that all these great stories that you read about in the Tanakh are not just theoretical, but actually, possibly, compellingly, may have happened. That's what you get. That was what Ezra will take me on or agree with me. But when we guided Yafo very briefly, and I figured, I'm a Rebbe, I'm a teacher, I'm a tour guide. I talk a lot. I can't help it. I'm too enthusiastic and passionate about the things I teach. But I try as much as I can to keep it down. And I thought, okay, tour of Yafo, I'm going to keep it short and sweet. I had roughly a plan in my mind, what I wanted to see and say. I finished, and unexpectedly, everybody said, "What? That's it? We want more." And I said, "Oh, well, okay, I could do more. I can always do more." And so we did more and more and more and more and more. And I think my theory about why the unexpected enthusiasm was, it was one of the first times we had gotten out of Or Sameach and the dormitory since they'd been quarantined for a couple months through the Corona crisis. So, and it was a lovely sunny day along the beach at the beachfront city of Yafo. But I think it was more than that. I think there was something profoundly moving about it because you sit in yeshiva and you learn all these concepts. When you go out to the sites, they become real. They come to life. You picture them. And that's true in places like Shem and Har Grizim and Har Eval, which is what I'm describing now, and it's true in the most important and thrilling place, which is, of course, Yerushalayim Yer HaKodesh, which is vast, and there's I could potentially guide there for a month and not lose content and not stop for lack of things to talk about and see and say. We almost got to the second holiest place in the world. I'm just giving you a loose feeling of what Eretz Israel is, maybe to whet your appetite. Fivey and Shlomi, Bezras Hashem, I hope to explore these places with you. We did not in the end succeed. Where's the second holiest place in the universe?
Me'arat HaMachpelah.
Good guess. That's right. Hebron Yer HaKodesh, with the Mars Machpelah, with the cave of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. Right. So we,
technically speaking, it would go between the Kruvim and then Kodesh HaKodashim and then Kodesh and then Har HaBayit and then Yerushalayim and then Hebron, right?
Right. I was grouping all those together in one unit. You can break them down if you choose.
I like being pedantic.
Fair enough. We do that in yeshiva. Hebron is very thrilling. Who's been there? I want to say a show of hands, but can it maybe like a show of icons if this is a Zoom session? Wow, I miss a classroom setting. I make eye contact. Thank you for those of you who I can make eye contact with.
There was tear gas last time I went.
Right. That's a good point. Anyway, Hebron Yer HaKodesh is another one of the places. It's built up a little bit, but not a lot. So I think you get a feeling of you're going back into antiquities. The things to see include obviously the Mars Machpelah, which the big building tends to obscure the real gold that's there, which is what you can't see, and that's the cave that's underneath the building, and it's out of bounds and inaccessible to any Jew at least, and it seems any other person as well. They have it nicely graded up and locked, and not accessible for all kinds of political reasons and otherwise. But people go there and they go into the Mameluke building and they have a feeling that they're standing by the graves of the patriarchs and the matriarchs. They're not. All the graves are somewhere underground, but at least you give the tourists what they want. Other great places to go include a place called the Avram Avinu Shul and that community around there, which we know Jews living in at least for 500-600 years, and arguably for longer. There's a fantastic reconstructed shul. It was destroyed in the riots of 1929, and then later on, eventually, it was destroyed decisively in the 19th. and then rebuilt according to the ground plan of somebody who preserved it. There's a place called the Beit Hadassah, which was the hospital, that is also a residential area. Where I have not taken yeshiva, and I would love to go one day, is up on the hill to the original Tel. Tel means a mound. In the pre-Roman eras of history, the Romans came along 2,000 years ago, and they enabled people to live anywhere they wanted to because, among other innovations, they created aqueducts that brought water wherever people were. You didn't have to live necessarily near a sweet water source, because before the Romans, you had to live near a sweet water source. You'd die otherwise. And so ancient cities are usually clustered around these mounds under which you'll find some kind of an aquifer, sweet water source. And those are called tells. And they're great for archaeology because ancient Egyptians may have lived there, right? Somebody comes along, destroys them, a new era, a new phase in history. The Phoenicians move in. They're gone. The Jews come in. And then the Romans and the Byzantines and the Arabs and the Crusaders and on and on and on to the modern era. And you get yourself a bunch of strata there, and you basically wind up digging into the past. The deeper down you go, the further back in history you go. So Tel Hebron is on the mountain. They discovered it's also not one of the more elaborately excavated parts of Eretz Yisrael. But they did find interesting finds. They have jewelry that they think is sari made of jewelry. All right, if it sells, why not? They have a cemetery up on the mountain too that is younger. It's not as old as the Tel. It's only about 400 or 500 years old. But as such, it's one of the more important and older cemeteries in Eretz Yisrael, and there's some notable figures buried there. When you get to be a tour guide, you get to go to cemeteries, at which point, if I'm thinking of myself as I was when I came when I was 14 years old, I think, great, go to it, buddy. You have a good time in those cemeteries. But frankly, I hang out in cemeteries proudly these days. They're fascinating. You learn so much of the past, and you get connected with some of the great tzaddikim, some of the great personalities. By seeing at least where they're buried, it forms a connection of sorts. And on the mountain, you've got a cemetery. Notable figures who lived there the last 500 years include Rav Shlomo Adani. Rav Shlomo Adani used to be a household name. I don't know if any of you could tell me anything about him. He came from Yemen give me a second, not Corona. He came from Yemen in the 1700s. He lost almost all of his family, and by the time he was a teenager, he was alone in the world, an orphan without siblings. And other people would have been crushed by life, and he responded in the opposite way. He came back with fire. He found some great rabbis, including the Chidah, and they taught him, and he became one of the great Torah sages of his generation. He wrote a fantastic commentary on the Mishnah, the Meleches Shlomo. Self-made man, really. I mean, he learned with Rebbe's, but I'm saying that he picked himself and made something remarkable of himself. Great figure of inspiration. You've got the Reishis Chochmah, who lived a little earlier. He was one of the students of the Arizal, who came to Hebron and was one of the early giants of Hebron. That because he went, others would go. Wherever Torah scholars go, others flock. So that became a focus. He was there. You have also the Stei Chemed. Stei Chemed is still the name of a summer camp. Yeah, it's so sad because whenever I say the name, the summer camp, everybody says. That's how they know things nowadays. The world, like Ezra Brooker, is upside down. And before it was that summer camp, it was a remarkable work written about 130 years ago by Rav Yechezkel Medini, who lived in Eretz Yisrael before he moved to the Crimea, and basically started a whole Baal Tshuva movement of an isolated community who didn't really have much access to Torah greatness, and he picked them up. He wrote an encyclopedic work, which is called the Stei Chemed. virtually from memory. He's a remarkable kind of a person, one of these people who remembered everything that he ever saw, and he was able to write it up and put it in encyclopedic form. He wound up living the last years of his life in Hebron and is buried there, and you can visit his grave. I'm going broad and also specific to give you a feeling of what there is if you come and you travel around and see. You're reconnecting with some of these dynamic personalities of the past. Interestingly, the Arabs in Hebron recognized Rabbi Cheskel Medini. He was there in the early 1900s, and they saw him as a holy man, and they revere holiness. Remember that the closest religion to Judaism is Islam, much closer than Christianity, much closer than Reform and Conservative. And the Muslims say they have a certain affinity. I mean, if it wasn't for the Arab-Israeli conflict, we'd probably be closer, because they certainly have an affinity. Their ideas are closer to Jewish ideas, and they recognize a holy man when they see him. And they loved him, and they admired him. And when later on in Arab riots, particularly in 1929, much of the cemetery would be vandalized, and many of the tombs destroyed by the Arabs, they didn't touch the Stei Hamed's tomb. And so later on, there was a problem later on, but they were able to renovate it, and it's one of the few tombs that's relatively intact when you visit the Hebron cemetery. Has anybody ever been to the cemetery in Hebron? Okay, another great stop along the way in Eretz HaKodesh. I develop all kinds of tours that are around what I find to be fascinating little dramas in history. I like to guide things that I find are relevant, that we could learn morally from, or we could learn about why the Jewish people is in such a mess today. One of the places that I like to guide in Eretz Yisrael is totally unlike anything I've described before. It's a little community called Mazkeret Batya, which is in the southern inner coastal area. It was one of the original Moshavot farming colonies of the Baron Rothschild. It was founded in 1883, just at a time the Jews were coming back to their roots, going back from the four holy cities and some of their other areas with the new idea, or really a really old idea that they were renewing, of going back and farming land in Eretz Yisrael. Our forefathers, our foremothers, they were all shepherds. Moshe Rabbeinu was a shepherd. They were very connected with the land. For centuries, Jews were disconnected from the land, partly because the non-Jews the non-Jewish rulers where we lived didn't let us farm the land. They kept that for themselves. We had to go into other kinds of trades. But in the 1800s already, Jews are coming back to Eretz Yisrael, and there's a big movement afoot pushing for the agricultural settlement of the Holy Land. And these pioneers came. In the case of Mazkeret Batya, it's a long, dramatic story. I'm going to spare you the whole detail, but I'm going to whet your appetite, just give you a little bit of it. You can see a lot today and really recreate the whole episode. These were Russians from a small village who came over without any knowledge or training in farming the land, any land, much less the rocky soil. Eretz Yisrael is a lush. It's a lush, gorgeous land. It's the most outstanding land in the whole world. The Torah tells us this last week's parsha, or for you this week's parsha, Parsha Shalach, tells us that. But for centuries it had gone to seed, and the locals, mostly Arabs, had depleted the farms of their nutrients. They burned down all the trees to support their lime kiln industry, and what was left by the 1880s was a bunch of rocky soil. And these pioneers came back to try to make it into arable land, and they suffered and they struggled, and they were frum, they were religious in the most pure sense, and they actually had a charter. You can go to the museum in Mazkeret Batya today, and they describe. They actually have the original charter. They said that we, in the course of taking on this pretty daunting, pretty ambitious enterprise of starting a new Jewish farm in Palestine, as it was called, realized this is going to be quite an uphill challenge. We will only agree to take on this challenge if we're able to keep the Torah and all of its mitzvahs. If in any way we have to compromise on the Torah and the mitzvahs, we're just going to pack up and go back to Russia. Hashem only gave the Jews the Holy Land on condition that we come, that we keep the Torah and the mitzvahs, and that we behave ourselves. If that's not possible, we're not staying. By the way, that idea is in the Talmud and in the Poskim and the later great authorities. They also write about, if you're going to come to Eretz Yisrael, it's not a small thing. You got to behave yourself. You got to treat it like the Holy Land that it is. So they came and they did have lots of problems, not the least of which Baron Rothschild, who was essentially supporting them, set up some secular Parisian overseers who were not sympathetic to religious life. And in one episode, the overseer complained to the Baron about his workers. He said, "These farmers, you should fire them all, kick them out of Maskeret Batya." Why? In the mornings, they pray way too long. And it's an excuse. They're lazy. They just don't want to go to work. That's what the Parisian clerk reported back to the Baron. The Baron is an interesting personality. He wasn't Shomer Shabbos. The Rothschilds originally were. The famous Rothschild clan with all their money, the first international banking family in history. They started out certainly religious. All Jews were once. But when you go this, you cohort with all those kings and you deal with all that money, it doesn't always conducive to a life of Torah and mitzvos. And he was not quite there. Didn't keep Shabbos. Didn't do a lot of things. Didn't know a lot of Torah. But I have to say, he had a strong feeling. His wife was even more so. She kept the kosher kitchen. A strong sense of tradition. We'll listen to his response to the clerks. He said, "You tell those farmers that when they pray in the morning, they pray as long as they need to. The success in coming back to Eretz Yisrael depends on Hashem. If Hashem's not going to be there, what can we do? All I can do is write a check. All the farmers can do is hoe the land. Hashem makes it all come together." When you visit Maskeret Batya today, you see many of the original buildings are either restored or they've been preserved. The original street is named Rothschild Street, as it was back in the day, and you really walk around and get a feeling of what happened there, because what happened there is quite a story with lots of drama and intrigue and tragedy. The tragedy includes, hi, Ephraim Hod.
Hi, Rabbi. Sorry, I'm
Hi,
late.
nice to see you. I was hoping you'd take us with you on your rounds.
Sorry, I was late.
Yeah,
I
great,
watched
great.
Oh my God, it's almost 3 o'clock.
Great, nice to see you there. I'm guiding a little bit of Eretz Yisrael, but from a distance. So you'll use your imagination. So we're in Maskeret Batya right now, one of the thrilling sites, one of the first farming colonies in the modern era. The Jews cultivate the land, and the story that takes place there is. I actually assert this. This is why I think it's so relevant. You ever hear of something called ultra-Orthodox, and you hear something else called modern Orthodox? Those familiar terms? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, in Israel they call it Haredi, Mizrahi. Okay, all names, but similar concepts. If we teleported, if we went back in time a couple hundred years, we wouldn't really find antecedents. We wouldn't find these groups. The Jews, it's not like the Jews necessarily were all living in one fairy tale. There were problems in the Jewish world, but you didn't have distinctive factions. And I mean this particularly of Haredi versus modern Orthodox. I assert, and this takes more time than I have tonight to go into, but I'll throw out this idea. The story that took place there and then in the Shemitah year of 1888, 1889 was such a divisive controversy, broke apart Jews from so many different places, and was so explosive across the Jewish world, actually. I mean, what happened in a few farms in Palestine was discussed as all over the planet. Wherever there were Jews, they were talking about this controversy. And it basically galvanized the different movements so that we are, as Orthodox Jews today, sadly split. But we're split not just culturally, but also ideologically. And a lot of this is traceable back to this period. In the event, without going into much detail, but what was really happening was Maskeret Bat, it was in that year, 1888, 1889, it was the first year in any meaningful way, really, in the modern days, that the Jews were back in Eretz HaKodesh, in the Holy Land, farming their land, in which suddenly the Shemitah year, which is the sabbatical year, we're going to have it, not this coming year, but the year following again, the sabbatical year was coming out. Well, in the sabbatical year, the Torah tells you, you have to rest. Just like on Shabbos Kodesh, we rest one day a week. So on Shemitah, we give the land the rest. You don't work it. Well, go tell that to a bunch of farmers who are struggling to make Eretz Yisrael re-blossom, come back to life, trying to, harvest rocky soil and make it fruitful and productive again. You'll probably guess that the farmers in Maskeret Batya were very strong. They were going to keep the first Shemitah year according to the Torah. Otherwise, they would just leave. And you would also probably guess that the Baron's Parisian clerks who were overseeing the whole enterprise would have none of it. And they fought Shemitah. They fought the entire mitzvah. As one editorial in a secular newspaper back in those days said, people who followed this particular controversy, this conflict, realized it wasn't just about Shemitah. It was really about what's going to be in the Holy Land, in Eretz Yisrael, in the modern era. Are we going to be, if Jews return to Eretz Yisrael, will we be keeping the Shulchan Aruch? Will it be a reestablishment of religious life? Well, if you're a secular person, in those days particularly, they were hot and bothered by religion. They wanted none of it. And if they're going to come back to Eretz Yisrael, they're going to do it on their terms. And the religious world said, no. Hashem gave the land of Israel as a gift to the Jews on condition, strings attached. You keep the mitzvahs. The Torah says this in a number of places, including, coming full circle, back to that bracha and klala that we talked about in Har Grizim and Har Eval, in Shechem. If you keep the mitzvahs, good, you can stay, and Hashem will make you happy. You don't keep the mitzvahs, are you in trouble? This is a struggle that the story makes very clear in Maskeret Batya, as what fell out there became very clear, but of course it's as relevant. It was relevant then, and it certainly is relevant today, as the Jewish people still try to forge their destiny in Eretz HaKodesh. Anybody who follows the politics in Israel, Israelis are political junkies. They love it like Americans love sports. They know everybody. You ask an Israeli 6-year-old, he'll tell you everybody's sitting in the Knesset and why they all can't stand each other and what each of the ideological divisions are. But a lot of the divisions run along religious and secular lines. This is a struggle for the soul of the Jewish people in the heartland of the Jewish people in Eretz HaKodesh. And all of this and a lot more you really see and you feel and you experience vicariously as you walk around. And B'ezras Hashem, Shlomi and Fyvie, I hope to do that with you personally. And the rest of you, I hope we get a chance to do that sometime soon as well. Any questions? Nope. Okay, it's great seeing you. I'm coming back on in 20 minutes at 10.